My name is Harman Murtagh, and I'm a native and a resident of Athlone, and I'm also a historian. I'm going to talk briefly about a very interesting monument with a long history that survives in Athlone, namely the Town Wall fortifications. This map shows their plan outlined in black. You can see the river running down the centre, with the East Town on the right and the West Town on the left. The East Town fortifications embrace an area of about 14 acres, and we'll come back to look at it in more detail. In the West Town, you can see the castle outlined in red beside the bridge, and the roughly rectangular fortifications surrounding it that embrace about 11 acres. Beyond it, further west, are the extensive artillery emplacements known as the batteries, of which little trace now remains, except for number 1 battery in the top left-hand corner of the map, which is currently undergoing restoration by a dedicated voluntary group. The batteries were an active defence work from the early 1800s to the 1850s. The purpose of their guns was to obstruct any French invasion from the west that was attempting to cross the Shannon at Athlone. Why build a town wall? To defend a town and its citizens from attack by hostile forces is the obvious reason, but also to defend the townsmen, burghers and freemen and their families from robbers and disorderly intruders. So for that purpose, access was through gates that were locked at night. The giant padlocks from the Athlone town gates survive, and they're on show in the castle. And that's one of them there, the North Gate lock that's in the illustration. Another reason to build a town wall was for prestige. People in historic times distinguish a walled town from what they called a poor naked village. The first town wall in Athlone appears to date from 1251, when King Henry III ordered a murage grant to wall the towns of Rindoon and Athlone. Now, Rindoon is on the shores of Lough Ree, and it still has its town wall, so we may presume that the Athlone town wall was built at the same time. But of that medieval town wall, as far as can be seen, little, if anything, now remains. A new East Town Wall was erected between 1578 and 1636. The first thing that were built were town gates, and that's the North Gate depicted there in the illustration on the right. And the North Gate and the Dublin Gate, which appears to have been similar, although we have no illustration of it, they were erected around 1578. But the citizens were slow to build, to complete the town wall fortifications, and didn't finally do so until 1636. This was because it was a very expensive process and they didn't much like paying for it. The Dublin Gate, located at the junction of Church Street and Dublin Gate Street, was an obstruction to traffic in more peaceful times and was demolished sometime before 1784. The North Gate, depicted here, was demolished in 1840. Bastions are rectangular projections from fortifications intended to provide defensive fire against attackers from all angles. And you can see one illustrated there with the defensive wall just on the right and on the left, and then the bastion projecting out from it with 2 flanks, 2 faces, and ending in a nose or point. And they were backed up by earthworks. You can see there a very thick looking wall, but that's because there's earth behind it. And they were also had a low profile, and both of these factors helped them to withstand an artillery bombardment, as well, of course, as providing a platform the earthworks provided a platform to enable the defenders to have a point from which to fire their artillery and other weapons at the attackers. The original town wall of the East Town was a simple horseshoe in shape. You can see it there on the right. The Cromwellians military engineers came to Athlone in the 1650s, and they saw the town as being a fortress, and they were not impressed by the fortifications that they found there. And so they erected a number of bastions on the East Town Wall, and they built new earthwork fortifications around the West Town. And you can see the little projecting spikes of the bastions on the East Town. And then if you look at the West Town, you can see it's a rather more regular shaped fortification with bastions at the corners and demi-bastions or half bastions at the riverside. And the red structure in the center of the West Town is, of course, the castle. And also, if you look closely, you can see a large projection, number 21 there on the West Town, and a similar large projection over on the East Town. And these are bastion-shaped structures that weren't technically speaking bastions, but they're virtually the same, and they protected the two main entrances to the town, the Dublin Gate on the East Town and the west, and the gate to the west of Ireland on the West Town. Next. Well, the West Town or the fortifications of the West Town were earthworks, and they have completely disappeared. In the East Town, however, several standing sections of the wall survive. There's the Dublin Gate Wall in front of the civic offices along the side of St. Mary's Churchyard. There's the North Bastion at number 6 there in front of the civic offices. There's the northern boundary of the Prince of Wales Hotel car park, number 8 or so there in the illustration. And there's the Gardens Bastion at number 9, which is very well preserved. And then the wall runs along between Court Devenish and Railway View until you get to the big bastion at Lucas Lane. And then elsewhere, there's the number 1 battery. It's on the west side of the town, and it, of course, dates from the early 19th century. The stretch of wall extending from the now lost Dublin Gate is very prominent and fairly impressive. It may be on the line of the 13th century wall, because where St. Mary's Church of Ireland Church now stands is the site of the medieval parish church, and you would expect to find it inside the town wall. So perhaps this wall follows that line, may even partly be constructed from the masonry that remained there, if there was any. The surviving masonry, however, appears to date from the 17th century. And you can see if you look at the plan on the bottom right, you can see the triangular shaped bastion that protects the East Gate, which linked Church Street and Dublin Gate Street. And because this triangular shaped structure was plonk on the road in front of the East Gate, it was no longer possible to enter the town or exit the town in the usual way. And so a sort of dog's leg had to be developed, running, as you came out the East Gate, you turned sharp left and then sharp right again through what is now the Bawn. And then you exited the town into Mardyke Street. Well, this was very tiresome and with a lot of sharp angles in it. And you can imagine coaches and carriages and vehicles, wheeled vehicles, have experienced a good deal of difficulty on those turns. And so in the 18th century, when more peaceful times existed, the citizens or somebody simply drove the road back again through the nose of the bastion, which you can still actually see the outline of the bastion in the some of the internal walls of the shops and houses near it. And here and there, you can actually identify bits of it sticking out onto the street. A similar defence work in Bastion Street, which of course got its name from the bastion-shaped structure, protected the western entrance of the town, again obliging traffic to exit or enter the town via a Dog's Leg Lane that is now Grattan Row. And once again, people got tired of this, and it was much easier to simply drive your livestock over the decaying earthworks, and then gradually they got worn down until they entirely disappeared. If you stand at McKay's shop and look towards Connaught Street, you can see a slight hump on the road, and that hump is all that's left, to my knowledge anyway, of the West Town earthwork defences. A very interesting and probably relatively early surviving section of the town wall is to be found between Court Devenish House and Railway View. And it includes a semicircular tower, which is not at all a 17th century feature and is suggestive of an earlier date. It could possibly date to the Middle Ages, although it has a musket loop, which would be at least late 16th century. But again, it was not unknown to put musket loops into medieval buildings. And up to the top left, you can see very clearly the outline of the Lucas Lane bastion. Its nose and north face are somewhat irregular because they were breached by the Williamite artillery in 1691. And through that breach, the Williamite assault on the East Town was made. The East Town was lightly defended, and so the assault was successful in the early days of the Great Siege of Athlone. My impression on the ground is that the bastion, especially the left face of it, is a good deal less bastion-shaped, shall we say, than it appears in the Ordnance Survey plan, which of course was done in the early 19th century. But you can have a look at that yourselves sometime and see what you think. Well, town walls were long neglected in many centres in Ireland, but they're now recognised as an important part of our urban heritage. They, after all, distinguish towns from poor naked villages. And so conservation is now proceeding in many centres. Athlone's town wall fortifications are a rare surviving example of 17th century walls around a town in the Irish Republic. Athlone is a member of the Town Walls Network, formed by the Heritage Council in 2005. And in recent years, important conservation and presentation work has been carried out on the surviving Athlone town wall defences. And here is some of it. On the left, you can see the condition of the town wall at Court Devenish, behind Court Devenish House, and also the cracks in the wall. Vegetation has invaded, including a tree, and upper courses of the wall have been dislodged. And that was what it was like on the left before the conservation work was done. And you can see that the wall is very neatly presented now and secured on the right. And these works were funded by the Irish Walls Town Network, which I mentioned, and with the support of the Westmeath County Council. Another important conservation work carried out in 2020 was where some of the wall at the beside St. Mary's churchyard actually collapsed. And so for a while it was sort of barricaded off for fear more of it would collapse on passing citizens. But then the conservation work was undertaken. You can see the condition of the wall beforehand on the left, and you can see the excellent presentation of the wall afterwards on the right. And for 2021, further works are planned in three areas. One is to make further improvements to the wall at St. Mary's churchyard. A second is to refurbish the bastion in front of the civic offices, which has got a bit of growth on it and needs a little attention. And finally, the town wall at the end of the Prince of Wales car park, abutting onto the Gardens bastion, is going to receive some attention as well. And so what sort of work is going to be done? Tree surgeons are going to fell trees on or adjacent to the wall and treat the stumps to prevent further growth. Conservation specialists will repair the masonry using traditional techniques and natural hydraulic lime mortar. And all these works will be overseen by a professional conservation engineer and by a professional archaeologist. And again, funding is coming from the Irish Walls Towns Network of the Heritage Council with the support of Westmeath County Council. And for the town wall at St. Mary's churchyard and the bastion, the same procedure with professionals overseeing the work, and some funding coming from the Community Monuments Fund, this time of the National Monument Service of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. So the town wall fortifications of Athlone are a very interesting survivor, and they knit very nicely into the history of the town and the story of the town's evolution and development, and also some of the violent scenes that took there, dramatic in our Athlone's more dramatic times in the 17th century. If you want to know more about Athlone Town Wall, you could look at these various sources that you see on your screen. And I could modestly also recommend a book chapter I wrote many years ago called The Town Wall Fortifications of Athlone, and which is to be found in a book I edited called Irish Midland Studies, Essays in Commemoration of NW English. You'll get it in the local library. So do go for a tour and take a look at what's left of the fortifications and appreciate what a valuable part of Athlone's heritage they are.